Hearing you fine. I see you and I already have us on record. So there we go. I put
Okay,
it in
now-
GarageBand and so it's safe out in iCloud somewhere. So the last
Okay.
interview. So anyway, today we're welcome Sound Advice, Hearing Friendly Business Podcast listeners. It's so great to have you out there listening about hearing loss awareness. Today we have a special guest, Dr. Neil Bauman. He spells his first name Neil, Neil. And Dr. Neil is a PhD. He is also I'm fumbling around here. So let me just restart over since this one paper is not there. Okay, so sorry about that. Welcome, Sound Advice, Hearing Friendly Business Podcast listeners. It's so great to have you listening out there about hearing loss awareness. Today we have Dr. Neil Bauman on our podcast. He is a hearing loss coping skills specialist. And he's also a researcher, he's an author, and he's a speaker on issues pertaining to hearing loss. And he is no stranger to problems associated with hearing loss because he has successfully lived with lifelong severe hereditary hearing loss that I learned earlier that his daughter also inherited this. So luckily she's been raised by a dad that was compassionate about her hearing loss. And in the United States, we pronounce this new topic one way, and in Britain, they pronounce it another. So since Dr. Neil has a Canadian background and with that British accent, I'm going to let him lead the charge on what we're going to talk about during this portion of the podcast.
Thank you, Teresa.
So thank you for being on.
What I want to talk about is the subject of tinnitus. Now, tinnitus is the Canadian more common pronunciation. Tinnitus, if you want to put the accent on the second syllable, that's more common here in the US. I'm bilingual. I can say a and I can say ha. I hold dual citizenship, so I come by that honestly. So let's talk about tinnitus. What I want to talk about is taking control of your tinnitus. Now, tinnitus, you may never have heard it called this, but it's really a psychosomatic condition. And a psychosomatic is just a fancy word. Some people think that it means that you're all messed up upstairs. Doesn't mean that at all. It's from two Greek words, psycho or psychic, which is your mind, and soma, which is your body. And so all it's really saying is that your mind has something to do with a physical condition. The two are inextricably linked together. And I'm going to just talk about the psychic side of taking control of your tinnitus, because in my experience, treating the psychic side, the emotional side, I don't like to use the word psychology because you might think you're getting into some psychiatric thing. And this is just your emotions. It's how you feel about your tinnitus and how those feelings translate into how you experience your tinnitus. Now, I've had tinnitus for as long as I can remember. And so I can remember hearing tinnitus sounds when I was maybe 4 years old. So it goes back a long ways. And that's many decades ago. So let's look at tinnitus. We know I'm going to say tinnitus, you can say tinnitus, and I talk to people on the phone and they're always saying tinnitus and I'm saying tinnitus. And I said, perfect, all right, those are the proper ways to pronounce it. Now, the thing we want to know about tinnitus is that your body, something goes wrong with your, let's just call it the auditory system, whether it's in your ears or higher up. And in the past, it was always assumed that tinnitus was because you had damage in your inner ear. And so doctors started, they had a bright idea for the people that had intractable tinnitus. What they would do is they said, cut my auditory nerve. And that left them totally deaf, but they were saying, blessed relief from tinnitus. And so the doctors did that, and imagine their horror when they found out that in just over 50% of the cases, the tinnitus stayed the same or got worse. And there was no way to treat it now because they had cut the auditory nerve so that you couldn't use the soma side of things and try and modify your tinnitus. So they now know that tinnitus may or may not have something to do with your ears, but it always, always, always has something to do with your brain. And so if we know that, so that's why we're going to look at what we can do. And I have a book that I'm working, this is the 7th edition. It's called Take Control of Your Tinnitus. And I'm working on the 8th edition now, and it should be out hopefully by the summer. And what we are looking at is to get the understanding just what you can do with your tinnitus. And I have a presentation that I'll be giving on Saturday in a Zoom presentation on this very subject. It's quite popular. People want to know, what can they do? So let's start off and look at the tinnitus is a number of different kinds of sounds. We call it, your ears are ringing. Well, mine don't ring. My phone rings, ears don't. What happens is my ears, I have a hissy, whiny kind of tinnitus. I have a birds chattering in the trees, twittering kind of tinnitus. I have a rumbling tinnitus, but tinnitus can be a ringing, roaring, buzzing, banging, hissing, humming, clanging. It can sound like glass breaking, chainsaws running, all of these many different kinds of sounds. We just say, my ears are ringing. So just discount that is really that. Some people hear crickets chirping and so on. So it's so varied. And so when I say, I know what my tinnitus sounds like, I do not know what yours sounds like. But how we treat them is basically the same. And here's what happens. When you hear a new sound, let's say it's a quiet room and you start to hear very faint sound. That gets your attention because you don't know, what is it? Is that my ears? Is that a real sound or not? And a lot of times you don't know whether a tinnitus is a real. Like if you hear a rumbling sound, you just assume it's real. And for example, I didn't know way back, and I'd hear this rumbling sound. And so I would look out the window to see, it sounded like a bulldozer, for example. And I'd look out the window, nothing there. I'd look out the other side, there's nothing there. And so then I thought, well, maybe it's my furnace, because I lived in an old house that had a really old furnace, and the fan on the furnace was a little bit eccentric. So it would vibrate, and it'd vibrate the plenum, and it'd vibrate the floor. So I would go downstairs, and I'd put my hand on the plenum to see whether that was, and it wasn't. So then I had to figure out what is going on. I'm feeling my furnace or the bulldozer, the 18-wheeler or something, the rumbling. I not only hear it, I feel it. And when two senses tell you the same thing.
Right. Yeah. I never heard of anybody being able to feel it as well. So that's another new one for me.
I feel rumbling. And I could be sitting in the car waiting for my wife, maybe in the parking lot, and I've got the keys in my hands. Now I got an older car where you really need a key. You don't just have the proximity keys.
Right.
So the keys are in my hand. The tach is reading 0. I could feel my motor vibrating the car, and I can hear it. The only problem is the keys are in my hand. The tach reads 0. The motor isn't running and vibrating the car. And number 2, I'm deaf. I can't hear my motor anyway.
Right. So what are you doing to control this health condition?
You just accept it.
You accept it. Okay. So you're
That's
not
a,
doing anything like drinking calm. And I've heard that that helps, and increasing magnesium, which I've heard that helps because, as you know, there are those two theories. One believes that it's the brain or the psychosomatic area. And then the American Academy of Audiology at one point, I don't know if this is current or not, but I know that they said that it was when the cochlear, the cilia or the hair follicles in the ear, which I like to call the microchip of the ear. Basically, when those were blown out, then it just the sound comes in. It's mechanical energy at that point, and then it's looking for its hair cell or cilia. Then it's supposed to capture that sound and convert it from mechanical energy into electrical energy, and then send it off to the brain, which of course happens in 0.05 seconds for us to transmit that sound to understandable language inside of our brain to communicate with the other person or our current environment. So you had that since childhood, which you're the first person I met. You're the first on several things, but you're the first person I met that had it since childhood. So is that kind of like the musical ear syndrome, or is that something totally different?
I call them tinnitus and musical ear syndrome. I call them cousins.
Oh,
They,
cousins. Okay, that's a good
they're
analogy.
they're
Okay.
sort of, they have some genes the same,
Okay.
and then they're different. The real difference of telling is tinnitus is always a simple sound. It's not modulated. So you're hearing, the steady buzzing or roaring or hissing or humming and so on, that kind of thing. Crickets actually, in one sense, is sort of like stopping and stopping, but they're not modulated. Musical ear syndrome is where you hear modulated sounds such as speech and music and various others. And you can have both, but very often actually you have tinnitus and then musical ear syndrome can come out of it. But musical ear syndrome is where your brain is starved for, let's just call it good sound. They want to hear. And so basically what happens, as I see it, is it goes into your memory circuits and you get some of the memories and they get into your auditory circuits. So I think of little cars on roads, and they come off the memory road and there's a detour somehow, and they get onto the auditory road and they run up the auditory road, which comes from your ears to your brain, and your brain knows that. So when it sees these little cars coming up, it knows they're coming from your ears. And so you actually hear what sounds like music or voices. Sometimes it's perfectly clear. Sometimes it's very vague. It just sounds like music. And you hear it coming from that ear or that ear, it's got directionality. And when you've got a sound that has directionality, it's very hard to believe that your brain is just making it up. It's all in your head.
So Dr. Neal, back to your car analogy where you're sitting there with the keys in your hand. Was that directionality, or was that just where it was buzzing around in your head, for lack of a better way to describe it?
Well,
because it was that ringing in the ears or the sound in your ears or
okay.
buzzing in your ears or whatever.
Well, what people don't understand,
Okay.
with tinnitus, you can hear tinnitus in your left ear. You could hear it in your right ear. You could hear it in both ears, or you could hear it just in your head without reference to either ear.
Oh, okay.
And it can change from time to time. I'm just listening to mine right now. It's just in my head. It's not referenced to either ear right now.
Okay.
And so as it changes, but sometimes one sound will only be in one ear. For example, in my right ear, if I'm going to hear the flock of birds, what I call twittering, they only ever occur in my right ear, never in my left ear. The rumbling sound, I don't associate it with my ears, because I associate it with the feeling I'm getting at the same time that's coming up through the chair and through my body. And so I say that's, it's just there. And I just know that when I hear that, and a lot of people actually hear rumbling and they feel it at the same
Still
time.
at the same time. Okay.
And I know a number of people that are that way. Now you got to separate it from the real thing, because it could be a real vibration.
Right.
And that's why I put my hand on the plenum in the house. The plenum is cold and it's still. There's no sound and there is no vibration, and I'm still hearing it and feeling it. And I know, well, that's tinnitus, or depending what it could, because it's usually just a tinnitus sound rather than a muscular syndrome sound.
With my hearing loss, I didn't catch, what do you put your hand on again?
I did on the plenum, on the furnace, to see if it was
Oh,
running.
on the furnace. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
listening.
but
I'm going to, I'm not catching this. And if I'm not, maybe others aren't either.
Yeah, exactly the same for all things.
Yeah.
I have to put my hand on the fridge to see if it's running. I put my hand on the counter to see if the dishwasher's running. I put my hand on the washer or the dryer. That's how I know things are running,
Okay.
because I don't hear them.
So it's the kind of thing that I know William Shatner now is the spokesperson for the tinnitus, and I'm not going to enunciate it right. And Dr. Neil is going to correct me. There we go. I can say the name Goikachea, just so you know. It took me at least 3 or 4 years to get that one down, but the kind of thing that they did, just what you're doing, you're helping me out. So if you have somebody who has a hearing loss and they're not enunciating the word correctly, then in my opinion, I've given more than one person, and especially you, permission to correct me or to help me. Because when I got my hearing, when my hearing was tested the first time when I was in the 3rd grade in Morocco, Africa, nothing was done for me. Absolutely nothing. I mean, nothing. Other than my mother, who only had an 8th grade education, would sit down every day with me after school and practice with my enunciation. And that was one way that I was able to get through school and to get through life as unscarred as I have been with my hearing loss. We'll just sum it up that way. Because for a lot of people, they've looked at me and they've said, Teresa, are you sure you have a hearing loss? In fact, I have a friend that lives here locally that knew me, he still knows me, but he knew me for 4 years at that point. And he said, Teresa, do you have a hearing loss? Are you legally deaf? And I said, no, I'm not legally deaf, Daniel, but it's the kind of thing that I'm able to fake it. And it's not that I fake it. I use assertive skills when I need to, but it's also the kind of thing that I get so tired of explaining that the reason why my enunciation may be because of my hearing loss. And men have wondered if I am flirting with them because I'm doing just what you've done with your teachers and with the medical staff yesterday. I am looking at them intently, and I'm looking so I can read their lips. And of course, they think I'm looking at them when I'm really just trying to figure out what in the heck did they say, so that I can keep that conversation going, because I can play the dumb blonde part if I need to or want to, but it's the kind of thing that I would prefer not to go that route, and especially not nowadays. So it's the kind of thing that in your book, and especially in your 8th edition, what are you suggesting that people do that may have this particular health issue?
Okay, the first thing that you want to do is not focus on your tinnitus, because the way your brain works, you have a section of your brain called your limbic system, and that one has a number of jobs, but I'm just going to focus on the emotional component of your limbic system. What it does, it has in its database, in your head, it's got, if you think of a computer, it's got a database. And it has stored every sound you've ever heard from the time you were born, probably before that. And it has, think of it as a 2-column database. In the left column, it has the sound and its context and its meaning to you. And in the right column, it has a flag. And I conceptually think of these flags as a green flag, meaning that there is no emotional content. In other words, it's something that you can ignore because it's just useless information. And then you can have a yellow flag, an orange flag, and a red flag, double red, triple red. A triple red flag would be something where you are very, very emotionally involved because it's going to save your life. And so the way And so you see, your limbic system is set up to save your life and make, if something is a threat to your well-being. And so that is the key that I tell people. If you treat your tinnitus as a threat to your well-being, it will get worse and worse, and you will not be able to get rid of it. If you treat your tinnitus as a sound that is totally unimportant and not a threat to anything, you ignore it, and your tinnitus typically fades into the background. Let me give you two scenarios to just show you this in practice, because it's really interesting how it works. Let's pretend that you are a sweet young thing, which you are. You're just not quite as young as you used to be. And you live in an apartment, and you live on the ground floor. And in fact, your apartment is sunk half into the ground so that your windows are right at ground level. And it's a hot summer night. So you have your window open. It's 2 a.m. You're sound asleep in bed. And you hear a very faint sound. It's a furtive footfall outside your window. The boogeyman is there. We'll just call him the boogeyman. You hear this. It's so faint that if it was any fainter, you wouldn't hear it at all. Now, let me just back up one step. Your eyes and your ears are your early warning systems. You can hear from a distance. You can see in a distance. When you're sleeping, your eyes are shut. You have no more visual warning. Your ears never, ever sleep. They're always listening for everything. They have to listen. And so your limbic system filters everything, because your limbic system is part of your subconscious. So the sounds come into your brain at the subconscious level. Your limbic system looks at them. Faint footfall, boogeyman. It looks in the database, faint footfall, triple red flag. And it says, wow, we got to wake mistress up now. And so what it does is it turns its internal volume wide open. So the actual sound you heard and what you perceive it as is two different things. You perceive it as enormously loud, and you just sit upright, you bolt out of bed, you're primed for fight or flight.
Right.
Because it could be a boogeyman, depending whether you got your black belt or not, as to whether you're going to fight or get out of there. So that's your limbic system doing its job. Now let's take the where your limbic system takes a very faint sound that's important to you because it could save your life, so it's a threat to your well-being, and it makes it very loud, so in the conscious level, so that you will act on it, so you can't ignore it. Now let's go to the opposite way, and let's take the sound that your refrigerator makes when it cycles on and off. I have never yet seen a person sitting on the edge of their chair rapidly listening to the sound the fridge makes. You see, your fridge, if it's working properly, you just hear it in the background. And I will bet right now, if you had your fridge in your room right there, and I say right now, is your fridge running? You would have to stop and listen, because your limbic system has it flagged as a green sound, and basically you don't even hear those. It's just sort of half heard, or it's gone. And so therefore, what you do is you just ignore it. And it's not a threat, so you ignore it. So how do you treat tinnitus? If you treat your tinnitus as a threat to your well-being, in effect, like the boogeyman at night, it will get louder and louder because you keep focusing on it, and you can't not focus on it because you've told your limbic system's important. If you treat your tinnitus as a unimportant sound, like your fridge noise, I just use fridge because it's just meaningless. You know it's there. It's not a threat to your well-being. You just ignore it. And so the key is treat tinnitus. Don't focus on it. Just ignore it. Focus on the loves of your life and let your tinnitus just fade into the background. And that's what I do. And I've been doing it all my life.
Well, obviously, this is a topic that we are going to hear more about. However, for today's show, we have just kind of run out of time. So that's where it's at. And I hope that you continue to listen as you heard the rustling of the paper. And I should have been cognitively aware that I could have put up my fingers too. And Dr. Neil and I both are hard of hearing. So he could have basically lip read and talked at the same time, because most people with hearing loss do multitask most of the time, just like everyone else. So I'd like to thank you, Dr. Neil, for being on Sound Advice, a hearing friendly business podcast, and to help the world understand what it's like to have a hearing loss. And here we go. Let's see if I can make it into 3 syllables, but probably not. So just grin and bear me, or even correct me. So if you've got tinnitus, I didn't say it right again. There we go. So if you've got, just go ahead and say it for me.
Tinnitus.
Okay, there we go.
Or tinnitus.
Yeah. So as you know, I have avoided that word most of this podcast. And that's what I do when I can't figure out how to say a word. I just figure out some other word that's in place of it, because I, like everyone else, don't like to be embarrassed by misenunciating something. And then also the correction is okay if I give somebody permission, but I really despise being treated, and it's not you, but other people that have leaned down and said, well, she has hearing loss. So we, as a person with hearing loss, if we want the other person to know we have a hearing loss, then the majority of us will speak up for that. So if you're dealing with an adult, then just let them be their own spokesperson if they've got a hearing loss. And I see Dr. Neil shaking his head, so he agrees with me on that. But for now, we're going to say goodbye to this show. But you can here's Dr. Neil to let you know how you can find him to get his 8th edition on this health topic. Go for it.
Hearinglosshhelp.com is the website. That's HELP, not HEALTH, because even hearing people get that one mixed up. And the 7th edition is available now.
Okay.
And when the 8th edition comes out, the 7th edition will be retired. This one is a wonderful source of information, and you'll find all those things in it that you didn't know about.
And so much more, I'm sure, right?
And much more. And it's okay to go along and put the emphasis on the wrong syllable.
Okay, wonderful. I just love your sense of humor. So thank you for today.